Lionel Crabb, also known as Buster Crabbe to his acquaintances, had a life story that's both captivating and shrouded in mystery, especially his mysterious disappearance, which remains unsolved to this very day. With many of the files about this case staying locked up tight and classified until the year 2057, it's hard not to speculate that there's something truly remarkable hidden within these files. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. After an impressive stint as a Royal Navy frogman and civilian diver, Crabb ventured into the clandestine world of MI6 as a diver in his final months. So when you consider the timing of his vanishing act during a Soviet leader's visit to Britain, well, it's not too far-fetched to entertain the idea that Crabb might have been entangled in the shadowy realm of espionage. However, despite his disappearance taking place almost 70 years ago, it remains officially unsolved. Just what did happen to Buster Crabbe? Did he meet a brutal end as part of a secret spying mission? Or might he himself, as unthinkable as it might be given his exemplary record with the British military, have been some kind of double agent? Born in 1909, by the time the Second World War erupted, Crabb found himself serving in the Royal Navy, stationed in the treacherous waters around Italy. His crucial role involved clearing the area of numerous mines laid by the Italians. For his brave efforts during the conflict that ravaged Europe, he earned several accolades, including the prestigious George Medal. In 1943, Crabb rose to the position of Principal Diving Officer in the waters near northern Italy. His expertise proved invaluable in clearing numerous mines, preventing the loss of several British ships and countless lives. In recognition for his outstanding service, he was honoured as an Officer of the Order of the British Empire. After the war, Crabb continued his vital work, this time over in Palestine, where he focused on removing mines laid by Jewish forces from the waters around the Middle East. Then, by the late 1950s, Crabb transitioned to civilian diving work. However, due to his advancing age, which can be quite a factor for a diver, and, unofficially, his penchant for heavy drinking and smoking, he retired in March of 1955. Surprisingly, in the following year, MI6 came knocking, recruiting the former war hero for their own purposes. So, in the evening of the 18th of April of 1956, now working for the MI6, Crabb and his CIA handler, Bernard Smith, would check into the Sally Port Hotel in Portsmouth. There, they would meet the officials of the British intelligence services. According to the official story, one that would eventually come out in its fullest in the early 2000s, thanks to declassified Navy files, Crabb was to dive into Portsmouth Harbour, where the Soviet cruiser Orzonikidze was anchored after bringing Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev and his premier Nikolai Bulganin for diplomatic talks with the British government. Once there, he was to study their state-of-the-art propeller systems and then report back to British intelligence. Now, embarking on such a mission would have been perilous even in the most peaceful of times, let alone during the tension-filled atmosphere of the Cold War. Despite the inherent risks, British authorities had given the Soviets assurances that they would be shielded from any form of espionage activities by British intelligence as a gesture of goodwill during their visit here. Lies. When Crabb, a seasoned diver, failed to resurface after this dive and remained missing even 10 days later, it placed the British authorities in a delicate and embarrassing predicament, especially in their dealings with the Soviet Union. Matters escalated when the Soviet authorities declared from their visiting vessel that their crew members had spotted a diver near their ship on April 19th. Finally, after almost 2 weeks of uncertainty, the British authorities felt compelled to issue an official statement. Of greater concern, particularly for the British officials, was the narrative that they put forth, suggesting that Crabb had been engaged in testing underwater equipment far from the Soviet cruiser away in Stokes Bay. According to their account, he had mysteriously vanished from there, presumably ending up, whether alive or deceased, in the vicinity of this Soviet vessel. So, there you have it, that's the story. A diver was away round at Stokes Bay just testing equipment. Something happened and then the poor guy ended up near this Russian ship. Totally innocent, guys. The British media, especially the daily tabloids, wasted no time in ramping up the speculation. With Crabb being considered a national hero, they fervently pondered whether he became a casualty at the hands of the Soviet authorities. Some even entertained the dramatic notion that he might have been whisked away to Moscow aboard the Soviet ship for interrogation. It seems that the British Prime Minister at the time, Anthony Eden, well, he was kept in the dark about Crabb's secret mission and was unaware of its existence. In later released files, he explicitly stated that such a mission was unauthorised and should never have been conducted. In fact, he went as far as telling fellow members of Parliament that revealing details of this incident was not in the public's interest. Just over a year later, on the 9th of June 1957, two fishermen fishing near Pilsley Island in Chichester Harbour would pull up their fishing nets to examine their morning's catch, only instead of just fish, well, they found something else. There, entangled in the fisherman's net, was a headless, handless body dressed in a diver's wetsuit. After recovering from their momentary shock, they would contact authorities, who then came to bring the body to shore. Perhaps this is where the case takes on an air of ambiguity and assumption, and to some, such notions usually go hand in hand with a purposeful covering up of something. For example, the fact that the head and the hands were missing, well, made identifying the body impossible. Even Crabb's ex-wife, as well as his current girlfriend at the time of his disappearance, they couldn't make a certain and positive identification. In the end, the coroner pieced together a few clues to make the call. The body was roughly Crabb's height, and it was suited up in the same gear that Crabb would wear. So, with those damning details, they officially marked the case as closed, listing the cause of death as undetermined. Oddly enough, even though we're nodding along with the idea that this was Crabb, the missing head and hands, it didn't even seem to set off alarm bells for any of the authorities. Dive expert Rob Hoole chimed into this, saying that there wasn't anything shady about it, especially considering how long the body had been underwater. To them, it was all a tidy wrap-up to all the lingering questions. However, there were plenty of people who would go on record and express their doubts that this body was actually Lionel Crabb. For example, one of Crabb's longtime friends and fellow divers, Sidney Knowles, was asked to come and examine the body, and possibly identify it shortly after its discovery. He would immediately focus in on two scars that he knew full well Buster had: a Y-shaped scar behind his left knee, and a much larger scar on his left thigh. Neither of these scars were there, leading him to declare bluntly that the body was not Buster Crabb. What's more, a fuller examination of the body by a Dr. King would also reveal no such scars. An inquest would open 2 days later on the 11th of June, and then adjourned for 15 days to allow further time to establish identification, given the statements of the family members, Knowles, and of course Dr. King. This is perhaps where the first elements of a cover-up involving intervention methods first come to light. Just over 2 weeks later, so on the 26th of June, Dr. King would come back out and give evidence claiming that he had re-examined the body several days after his initial examination on the 14th of June. During this examination, he had indeed discovered that there were two scars that he had somehow missed previously. A photograph was then allegedly produced for the record, which Dr. King claimed that he hadn't actually taken himself, but he certainly was there when it was taken. Members of Crabb's family and those close to him were not at all happy with this sudden change of evidence, especially at such a high level in the British military. To them, this was perfectly obvious that it was in someone's interest if the public thought Crabb was dead. Before we dive deeper into these theories, let's take a moment to remember that some crucial parts of this case, especially what really happened with Crabb's disappearance, are locked away until 2057. I mean, we won't know the full story until over 100 years after he actually vanished. The fact that there won't be any living family members, not even third or fourth generation, around when all this information comes out, well, that might raise some eyebrows. But hey, not everything stayed hidden away. Once the 50-year rule kicked in, a bunch of files that were previously off limits started popping up for the public to see around 2006 and 2007. And they do indeed reveal a lot that was conveniently left out of all the original reports. One of the eyebrow-raising bits was the revelation that Crabb didn't dive solo. It turns out that he had a wee diving buddy who joined him on that mission. We'll circle back to this a wee bit later and dig into it a bit more. I promise it's all connected. What is also interesting though, is that around the same time such previously classified documents were becoming available to the British public, as well as the independent claims, were the sudden claims of an apparent former Soviet spy, Edward Koltsov, who would make claims in 2007 that he was the secret agent who cut Crabb's throat during an underwater struggle while Crabb attempted to place a bomb onto this docked Soviet vessel. The family and friends brushed this off completely as just a coincidence. Actually, there were a bunch of books floating around at the time, and they all seemed to be on the same page. They pretty much laughed off the idea that Crabb would be there planting a bomb, especially under the orders of the British military intelligence. I mean, really, come on, think about it. The ship's location at the time and the crazy fallout that would come from such a reckless move, that just doesn't add up. So, let's dive into what these supposedly explosive books had to say. One of them, Man Overboard by Tim Binding, was a real page-turner. It boldly pointed fingers at the British intelligence for Crabb's death. According to Binding, Crabb was actually considering defecting over to the Soviet Union, which would have been a huge propaganda disaster for the West. According to Binding's account, British intelligence got wind of this and sent in a diving partner who was actually an assassin. They assassinated Crabb before he could make any moves to spill the beans on government secrets to the other side of the Iron Curtain. There were plenty of theories floating around about Crabb's capture by the Soviet Union and his trip back to Moscow for some interrogation. Some researchers, and even some of Crabb's own family members, firmly believe that the British authorities knew about this entire ordeal, but instead of making a big fuss about it out in public, they wanted to handle things quietly, behind the scenes.
The events of the 18th of April 1956 took place within a relatively small area. The Soviet cruiser was moored at the South Railway jetty, less than a mile from Crabb's hotel. Early that morning, and without being seen by anyone at the hotel, Crabb left. Curiously, the next day the pages in the hotel register recording his visit disappeared.
Could all of this have happened right under the noses of the British public? I mean, is it possible that there was some sort of secret spy swap going on? It's not out of the realm of possibility for the intelligence services to orchestrate something like that. But if that did happen, then Crabb would have to take on an entirely new identity and probably set up shop somewhere far away from the United Kingdom. The British authorities would definitely want to keep a lid on any potential exchange like that, keeping it all hush-hush and away from the public eye. But you can bet that the Soviet authorities would have a field day with it all, right? I mean, it's the perfect fodder for their propaganda machine, stirring up some juicy controversy. Considering all that, it seems like any sort of exchange programme scenario might be a wee bit far-fetched. But there are other theories floating around, like the idea that Crabb actually switched sides and started working for the Soviets using this mission as a cover. But again, his friends and family and his colleagues, well, they quickly shut down that theory. They swear that despite his flaws and quirks, Buster was as loyal as they come when it came to his country. So here's another thought. What if Crabb was playing both sides? Like, he let himself get captured so that he could cozy up to the Soviets, while still secretly working for the British. It's another wild idea, but I mean, who knows? Double agent stuff can get pretty tricky. Those last two possibilities that I just mentioned, they're not totally out of the question, but if either of them actually happened, we'd probably have heard about it after the Soviet Union collapsed. Some other theories even say that Soviets might have captured Crabb and interrogated him. And considering his poor health at the time, he could have died during that interrogation process. As bizarre as all that sounds, that scenario could have been an awkward situation that both countries would want to sweep under that massive rug. Maybe all those theories are just simply overthinking things though. It's possible that Crabb simply had a freak accident down there. His habits of heavy drinking and smoking had definitely taken a toll on his health. Sure, his underwater skills were still top notch, but physically, he just wasn't in peak condition anymore. If that's really what happened, then why the weird attempt to pass off a headless and handless body as Crabb? Convenient that the two main ways to identify the body were both missing. Were they just trying to wrap up the case neatly for the public? Or does it hint that even the intelligence agencies were clueless about what really happened to Buster Crabb? Keep in mind the fact, as I've said, that a lot of these details in this case are still classified and they won't be public for several more decades. That alone suggests that there's more to this story than we don't know yet. When that extra information eventually does come out, future generations might not be so shocked by it. But for us living today, Those revelations would probably still blow our minds. But hang on, there's another important element to this case that we need to circle back on. So, speaking of the many books written about this case, there is one particular account that we really need to take a closer look at, and this offers an interestingly different perspective on things. Anne Bevan is the wife of the late Dr. John Bevan, known for his intriguing books called Commander Crabb, What Really Happened, and Crabbgate, which delved deep into this case. Dr. Bevan, who passed away from cancer in February of 2020, he conducted interviews with numerous high-ranking individuals regarding Crabb's disappearance. Many of these individuals were bound by the Official Secrets Act, and Dr. Bevan had pledged to keep their conversations confidential. The night before his clandestine dive, Lionel Crabb spent the evening with his old Navy pals in the pub. However, by dawn the next day, April 19th, he was still feeling worse for wear and a bit hungover. After that, what exactly happened to him does remain a mystery, except for the fact that he was spotted surfacing between two Russian cruisers. Remember, that's when the government were like, we don't know how he got there. The authors of this book speculated that he might have simply blacked out. They further suggested that if there was a build-up of carbon dioxide inside his equipment, it could have caused him to lose consciousness. If that were the case, then it could have led to him drowning. After drifting in the murky waters for hours, Lionel's body became entangled under one of the harbour jetties. Anything weighty on the seabed tends to be drawn towards the edges of the harbour as the water swirls on its way out. The South Railway jetty, where he was conducting his investigations, is notorious for gathering debris flowing out of the Portsmouth harbour. At this point, the government had been notified of Lionel's disappearance, as had the Royal Navy's divers based there in Portsmouth. Almost immediately, the Royal Navy launched a covert diving operation to locate Crabb's body. Experts suggested that the first place they would search would be this jetty, as it's a prime spot for all the collecting debris. Here's where the story gets really interesting. So one of the divers located Lionel's body and successfully freed it from this entanglement. However, the challenge now though was to transport the body to shore without drawing any attention. This meant dragging it along the seabed back to a point where it could be retrieved covertly. Crabb's body was then transferred to a boat and taken across the harbour to Fort Monkton, a top secret base, where the entire covert operation could unfold away from any prying eyes. All those people interviewed by the authors for their books said Lionel's body was held there for months. So, they get the team from Fort Monkton to dump the corpse in Chichester Harbour. It's the ideal place because the local fishermen use huge catch-all dragnets to fish there. Everything gets picked up, so they know it'll be found miles from their rogue operation in Portsmouth Harbour. Look, as I've said earlier, the official documents dealing with what happened to Lionel Crabb are embargoed until 2057, and according to one historian, that decision was made to protect one particular person, and his name is Lord Louis Mountbatten, also known as Dickie. There he is, played by Big Chuck Dance in The Crown. As the maternal uncle of Prince Philip and once removed second cousin of Queen Elizabeth II, Dickie was deeply entrenched within the royal family. However, Dickie was also especially close to his great-nephew, King Charles, who regarded Dickie as a mentor and a surrogate father. Andrew Lowney, author of The Mountbattens, claimed that it was Lord Mountbatten who ordered Lionel Crabb's final dive. Mr. Lowney, who had fought for years to get the Mountbatten papers, which were bought with taxpayer money, then deliberately kept secret by the Cabinet Office made public, well, he believes that Lord Mountbatten ordered a rogue MI6 operation which saw Lionel Crabb embark on this covert dive. According to biographers, he loved dirty tricks and secret operations. It's also believed amongst these investigators that there's a secret inner circle operating in the shadows of the British government at Whitehall, a group called the Weeders. Their job, as their title suggests, is to weed out documents that are sensitive and embarrassing and make sure that they remain secret forever. I mean, that does make sense. The historian then went on to say that parts of their role are harmless. However, he speculated that they are also there to cover up any mistakes, and their say is final. Mr. Lowney has claimed Lord Mountbatten's central role would have threatened to engulf the entire royal family, meaning that this scandal had to be concealed and covered up for 100 years. Concealed and covered up, of course, until the Queen, King Charles, and everyone close to Mountbatten would no longer be alive. Decisions taken by those in power which went wrong, that endangered lives both here and abroad. Decisions whose impact would be felt down the generations. Decisions for which no one could ever be held accountable, because no one was ever allowed to know. That's it for another video, folks. Thanks for tuning in. I always appreciate each and every one of you. Stay safe out there, tell someone that you love them, and above all else, remember, keep smiling.